Hello and welcome to Elemental Hardware Enrichment. My name is Aiden, and today we're going to be building a candy dispenser. Before we get started with building, let's go ahead and introduce the supplies that we need for this project. So for this project, we're going to need a damp rag, a bottle of glue, a hardware tray, some sandpaper, a hammer block, and our safety glasses. Let's go ahead and put those on now. Now that we've introduced all of our supplies, it's time to talk about the tools that we're going to need for this project. So I've got my toolkit right here. I'm going to go ahead and open it up and take out the tools that I need. For this project, all I'm going to need is a hammer. Now that we've got our tools, we can go ahead and close up the toolkit and get it out of our way. All right, we've got our supplies, we've got our tools, so the next step will be to open up the box and talk about the materials we're going to find inside. Let's go ahead and open up the box. So to open the box, I'm going to be using the claw of the hammer, and I'm going to be sliding it down the tape where the two box flaps meet to split it open. Once I've split the tape, I can go ahead and grab the corners and pry them up. Now that I've got my box open, the first thing I'm going to be taking out is some packing paper. I want to make sure to open up this packing paper just to make sure there's no small pieces wrapped up inside of it before I get it out of my way. Now we can go ahead and talk about the different wood parts that we're going to find inside this project kit. The first thing I'm going to be taking out is this piece here marked with the letter A, and this is going to be our slide. Next, I have this piece here, and this one as well, marked with the letter B, and this is going to be layer 1 and layer 2 for our candy dispenser. And these actually look identical, so it doesn't matter which one's which. Next, we have two rectangular pieces with a hole on either end, marked with a C, and these are going to be our layer 3 pieces. And just like our pieces before, these ones are identical, so they're exactly the same. Next, we have a piece marked with a D, and this is going to be layer 4 for our candy dispenser. And you'll notice that one side has a channel cut around the center. We also have a mason jar wrapped up in paper. And then we have this bag of dowels that will be our hardware. Now that we've gotten everything out of the box, we can go ahead and get it out of our way. All right, we've introduced all of our wood parts, so the next step will be to talk about our hardware. Let's go ahead and talk about our hardware. So I have my hardware bag right here. I'm going to go ahead and open it up and talk through the different pieces inside. The first thing I'm going to be taking out are these 4 dowels here, and these are going to be my 3/8 by 3-inch spiral dowel pins, and there are 4 of them. Next, I have 2 more 2.5-inch dowels. Now I've got everything out of the bag, we can get it out of our way and talk about the last piece of hardware, which is going to be our mason jar. Now I have the mason jar wrapped up in packing paper right now, and I'm actually going to leave it wrapped up through the assembly process to keep it protected. Now that we've introduced all of our hardware, the next step will be to sand our wood parts. All right, let's go ahead and get started sanding. Before I start sanding my pieces, I want to make sure to take all of these stickers off so that they're ready to go. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove the A sticker on my slide. And I'm just going to put them in my tray for now. And then I have these B stickers on layer 1 and 2. Next, I can remove the D sticker on layer 3, or layer 4, excuse me. And then the 2 C stickers on my layer 3s. Now that I've got the stickers off, I'm ready to begin sanding the wood parts. So in order to do that, I'm going to need my sandpaper and my hammer block. I'm going to be placing the sandpaper so that the soft side faces up and placing the hammer block so that it fits right across it. I can then fold the edges of the sandpaper over the block to form a sanding block. Now I'm going to begin by sanding layer 1, and I'm going to be focusing on these end grain edges where you see the layers of the plywood, because those are going to be the roughest edges to start with. So let's go ahead and sand all the way around this piece. Now that I've sanded all 4 of these end grain edges, I'm going to sand the top and bottom veneered edges of the piece where you can see the wood grain running through. While I'm doing that, I want to do my best to sand with the grain to avoid scratching the piece. So let's go ahead and do that now. Alright, I've sanded my veneered edges and my end grain. So what I'm going to do now is just run my sandpaper along these sharp edges of my piece to round over or break those edges. And I'm not going to sand them very much, just once or twice. And what that's going to do is kind of soften that edge and make it more comfortable to hold in my hands and less likely to splinter while I'm working with it. So I'm just going to place the edge of the sandpaper right up against the edge of the piece and run it up and down that edge 1 or 2 times. Once I've done it on one edge, I'm going to flip it around and do the rest. And then I can flip the piece over and do the same thing on the other side. Now that I've done that with my layer 1 piece, I'm going to go ahead and repeat those steps with my remaining pieces. Let's do that now. So I've just finished sanding the end grain and veneer edges of my slide, and you may notice that the slide doesn't have sharp edges like the other pieces, so we don't need to sand the edges or break the edges on this piece like we did with the others. But what we can do is remove the sandpaper from the block and sand out this hard to reach area around this hole. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to fold the sandpaper in half and just run it around this hole to sand out this edge right here. Next, I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to fold the sandpaper once again to sand out this side of the hole. Once I've got that nice and smooth, I can go ahead and pick up my layer 4 piece, and I'm going to do the same thing with this channel and hole in the center. I'm also going to fold my sandpaper once again and sand out this channel. All right, I've got all of my wood parts nicely sanded. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and use my rag to wipe up all the excess dust. So let's do that now. Once I've cleaned all my pieces, I can go ahead and wipe up my workstation as well. All right, I've got my pieces all sanded and cleaned up, so now I'm ready to start my build. Let's go ahead and get started with the build. The first step is that we're going to begin attaching our spiral pin dowels to layer 1. So I'm going to go ahead and grab layer 1 and place it flat onto my work surface just like this. I'm then going to go ahead and grab one of my spiral pin dowels, and I'm also going to open up my glue bottle and place the cap into my tray. I'm going to start by placing a bead of glue around one edge of the dowel. I don't want to put it directly on the top or bottom, but around this rounded edge. What I'm going to do is just place a drop of glue onto the edge just like that, and then use my finger to spread it evenly around that edge. Once I've got the glue spread out, I can wipe my finger clean, and then I'm going to go ahead and place this dowel right over one of the holes in layer 1 just like that. Once I have the dowel set, I'm going to hold it in place and tap it with my hammer until it's fully set into the hole and flush with the bottom of the piece. Once I hear that noise kind of change when it's making contact with the work surface, I can go ahead and check the bottom to ensure that it's flush with the piece. Once I've done that, I can go ahead and wipe up any excess glue. Now I can go ahead and repeat those steps with my remaining dowels to attach them to layer 1. So let's go ahead and do that now. Alright, I've got all the dowels attached to layer 1, so now I'm ready to move on to the next step, which will be to attach layer 2. Let's go ahead and attach layer 2. We're going to begin by applying a bead of glue between each of our dowels to form a square. Once we've created a square with our glue, we're going to go ahead and draw an X through the center with the glue. Now we've got a nice base of glue, we can go ahead and begin to attach layer 2. So I'm going to grab layer 2 and place it over the top of the dowels and begin to align the dowels with the holes in layer 2. Once I've got it aligned, I'm going to begin to tap it down with my hammer, but I don't want to tap directly onto the piece because I might damage it. So instead I'm going to remove my hammer block and I'm going to place that over the top of the piece and hammer onto that to protect the piece while I'm hammering. Now while I'm hammering, I want to make sure that I'm hammering all 4 sides of this down evenly so it's not going down at an angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on one side and give it a couple of taps, then move to the next edge, and then the next edge, and then the next edge. And I'm going to continue to move around the piece, hammering it down evenly until it sits flush on top of layer 1. So let's go ahead and get started. Once I've got my piece attached, I just want to pick it up and inspect it to make sure there are no gaps between my pieces. And it looks like I have a small gap on this side, so I'm going to go ahead and hammer that down a little more. Once I've closed up the gap, all that's left to do is wipe up the excess glue. Alright, I've got the glue wiped up and I'm ready to move on to my next step, which will be to attach layer 3. Let's go ahead and attach layer 3. So I have my layer 3 pieces right here, and you'll notice that each of these pieces has 2 holes on one side. When we're attaching these pieces to our project, it's very important that we attach them in the correct orientation so that they align flush with our first 2 layers. If I were to attach them this way, you would see that they would hang over the edge. So it's important when you're attaching the piece that you ensure that it's going to line up flush. But before we attach the pieces, let's go ahead and apply some glue over our first piece. So we're going to do that right here between our 2 dowels. I'm going to go ahead and spread the glue. And then I can align my piece right over that glued edge. Once again, I want to make sure that my orientation is correct so that these pieces are going to align and be flush. Once I've got that all checked out, I'm going to go ahead and grab my hammer block and use it to tap the piece down. So let's go ahead and get started. Just like before, I want to tap this in until it's flush right above my other pieces, and then check to see if there's any gaps. Looks like I have a little bit of a gap, so I'm just going to give it a few more taps. Now that I've closed up the gap, the last thing will be to just wipe up any excess glue that might be spilling out. And I've got the first piece attached, so we're going to go ahead and repeat those steps with our remaining layer 3. Let's do that now. Just like before, I'm going to go ahead and check for any gaps, and then wipe up any excess glue. And just like that, we have layer 3 attached, so the next step will be to assemble and attach our slide. Alright, we're ready to move on to our next step. Before we can attach the slide to our project, we need to assemble it with the handles. So I'm going to go ahead and move this off to the side for now, and I'm going to place my slide in front of me so that these 2 holes face up. I'm then going to locate my 2 remaining dowels, and remember these are my 2.5-inch dowels. And what I'm going to be doing is placing 1 dowel into each of these holes. But before we do that, we need a little bit of glue. So I'm going to be placing glue along one of the rounded edges of my dowels, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to spread that glue around evenly using a finger. Once I've got that glue spread out, I'm going to hold it over one of the holes in the slide and tap it in with my hammer. Once I've got that attached, I'm going to go ahead and wipe up any excess glue. Now we can go ahead and repeat the steps with our remaining dowel. right, we have our handles attached. So the very next thing we're going to do is place our slide handle side up onto our assembled project and just ensure that it's going to slide back and forth easily. If you do notice that there's any sort of resistance here, you can always pick up this piece and sand the edges and also sand the inside of your layer 3 pieces to ensure that you're reducing friction. But you should ideally be able to slide this back and forth with no resistance. And once we're certain that it's going to slide well, we can go ahead and leave it right here, and we're ready for our next step, which will be to attach layer 4. All right, we're ready to assemble layer 4 and attach it to our project. So for that, I'm going to need my jar, which I have right here, and I'm going to go ahead and remove the paper. Now remember, you want to be careful with this because it is made of glass, and what we're going to do now is go ahead and remove the lid and place the jar off to the side somewhere safe. I'm then going to move this off to the side as well and grab my layer 4 piece. I want to place this onto my work surface so that this channel faces up. Once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and place a little bit of glue into the channel that's facing up. Not too much, just a thin layer all the way around. Once I've got the glue in there, I'm going to flip the jar lid over so that this lip faces down. And I'm going to line that up right over the channel. Now I'm going to tap this into place with my hammer, but I don't want to tap directly onto the lid because it might damage it. So instead, I'm going to lay my hammer block over the top and move the hammer block around the lid as I tap it into place. So let's do that now. And just like that, I have the lid fully set into that channel with no gaps between the jar or between the lid and the piece itself. So now I'm ready to attach layer 4 to my project. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my project right here. Again, I want to make sure that my slide is attached while I'm doing this. And I also want to make sure that when I attach this piece, that the lid is facing up. I'm then going to apply a bead of glue onto my layer 3 pieces between the two dowels, being very careful not to get any glue onto my slide because then it might not work very well. So let's go ahead and apply our glue on both sides. And then we can go ahead and place layer 4 over the top of our dowels. Again, we want to double check that the lid is facing up when we do this. Once we've got it all lined up, just like before, we're going to take our sanding block and we're going to tap this piece down evenly on all 4 sides. So let's go ahead and do that now. Once we have our piece in place, we want to go ahead and check for any gaps. And it looks like the piece is fully flush, so the last thing to do will just be to wipe up any excess glue. All right, just like that, we have our candy dispenser fully assembled. So now I'm ready to go get this decorated so that I can fill it up with candy and start using it. So I'll be right back. All right, I got my project all decorated and I think it turned out awesome. So now I can show you guys how to use it. I've already filled up my jar with my favorite candy and I'm going to go ahead and attach it to my project. So I'm going to flip the project over like this and screw the jar right into the lid. Once I've got it screwed in, I can flip it over right side up, and then this hole in the slide, I need to slide that in so it lands right underneath the jar. From there, I can use my hand or a small tray and slide it right underneath the slide, and then I'm going to push the slide out to dispense the candy. And just like that, I have a perfect serving of candy to enjoy. So now I can take this home or take it to the office and share the candy with my friends and family. I really appreciate you guys stopping by to build this with me on Elemental Hardware Enrichment. My name is Aiden, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next one.